regarding the architecture of Vijayanagara. We really admire the secular architecture or the religious architecture of the Vijayanagara. What wonders me is why even at the turn of 13th, 14th century they didn't adopted the architectural features that were brought from outside. See, be the use of cement or the arches or in that way, and they continued the traditional lintel and beam structure. See, like I told you, the thing is Vijayanagar Empire itself. When you're saying about Vijayanagar Empire, it was consisted of people from different empires. So basically, like I told you, the foundation of Vijayanagar Empire, it was like you had the five great kingdoms, the Hoysalas, Chalukyas, the what we call the Kakatiyas. So basically, when those empires collapsed, all of them came to Vijayanagar Empire, and each of them brought their own influences. So, like I told you, what we are calling, so what they did was they just started adopting the best practices from those particular schools of architecture, which, and it was sort of a mix and match, which came up into their own kind of unique kind of architecture that was presently a combination of all these actually. Yeah.
They say Hampi was the richest city in the world at its peak. What data do we have to make us?
Actually, okay. Ajay, I did mention, if you can read we can go through my book, I mentioned that in this one. Okay, one of the factors, like the richest city in the world, one of the factors was the very thriving trade it had. Like I told you, it had a very prosperous trade on the western coast. So it had a very flourishing trade. I'll just, actually I just skipped it, but I'll just show you why Hampi was actually so rich also. Vijayanagaram, the position on the western coast gave it a very flourishing trade, and it also had a very active shipbuilding industry also. So that it meant it had people, merchants who could travel to other parts, though the trade was primarily with China and Arab. And here what was happening was, so there was a very thriving trade with both China and with the Arab world. So with the Vijayanagar Empire, they used to export these semi-precious stones and the cotton cloth and porcelain to other countries, and in turn they started importing from other places. Like from Palestine, they got copper, mercury, and coral. They imported silk from China and horses from Persia. And one thing is, what they had because they had the control of Golconda, which was like one of the major diamond centers, that also brought in their prosperity. So this was one of the reasons why it actually emerged into one of the most prosperous cities in the world, because of its very thriving trade with the other countries, with the rest of the world. Okay, I mean the data I can't. I don't know the technical details, but this was the factors that made it one of the world's richest cities actually.
I have a follow-up question, slightly not too connected. In the Maratha history and the earlier two talks we've had here, there was a constant sense of what is India. Okay? Shivaji, Sambhaji Maharaj, even up till the 1720s, the Peshwas, that what is India, what is Sapta Sindhu. If the Vijayanagar Empire had any idea of what it meant to be the civilizational nation, if I may say, are there any?
No, see, okay, yeah. Unfortunately, again, like Vijayanagar, like I told you, the way Vijayanagar Empire is studied, it was taken as mostly a southern empire. That's the way it was represented in most of our books and all. So, but even now they say it is. When I speak about Vijayanagar Empire, they say that it is mostly restricted to South and Deccan. It is still considered in that way. Though there is some awareness that it was a great empire and lasted. In many ways, they still take it as a southern empire, but which I feel is rather unfortunately, because for major part of, almost if you take the South and Deccan, that actually makes up almost like around 60 to 70% of the Indian landmass. So it is pretty much a part of the Indian empire, but this is some aspect that for some reasons I don't know has not been really stressed upon by the different scholars or academicians, and I don't know why exactly. Okay, yeah, for some reason, but unfortunately, this aspect is taken. It is like considered a sub-regional empire, the best, rather than Indian empire, which I feel is not really right. Yeah.
While you do mention about the influence of Vidyaranya Swami on the foundation of the Vijayanagar Empire itself, is there evidence that probably the Sringeri Mutt in a longer duration of time also had a significant influence on the way the empire was managed and controlled. Not necessarily on a daily basis, but more so in terms of a guidance and direction.
Obviously. Like I'll just go back to that particular one. See, if I, for example, if I take, for example, if I take this Madhava scholar Vyasatirtha, like he was like one of the, he was like one of the leaders. Like, see, basically in South, basically you had like what is called as the Munitrayam of this Dvaita Vedanta philosophy in South, which was like one of the leading philosophies out here. Okay, so the three persons were there: Vyasatirtha, Madhvacharya, and Jayatirtha. Okay, so this way, the Sringeri Mutt, I think the Sringeri Mutt, which I told you, it was like associated with the Dvaita Madhava cult. So, apart from Vidyaranya, though in the later stages also, maybe its leaders were not directly involved in it, but the philosophy, the founding philosophy, because the Sringeri Mutt actually influenced the philosophy of most of the the Dvaita, most of the Dvaita Vedanta and the Madhava philosophy was influenced heavily by Sringeri. And that influenced Vijayanagara a lot, and that was instrumental in the philosophy of Vijayanagara Empire also. Okay, and I did not go into this aspect much more deeper. Vijayanagara Empire also saw the emergence of philosophers like Kanakadasa, Purandardasa. I did not go into that aspect here, but it also saw the emergence of philosophers. These people like Kanakadasa and Purandardasa, they were actually not. They were hailed from what we call as a lower caste. They were like, one was a porter, one was a goldsmith. But they actually popularized this philosophy with their very simple works. And that was actually one more factor. That's actually a very large topic. But how religious movements and how the Bhakti movement actually made its impact in the Vijayanagara Empire also. Yes.
We read about Vijayanagara kingdom, we get to know about a feudal period. Like whether it was a feudal kind of institution they had invested.
See, it was feudal, like most of other things. I'm coming to that part. Vijayanagara Empire, like most of the empires, was pretty feudal in nature, but it was not a very rigid kind of feudality.
The European notion of feudalism of Henry.
Yeah, it had that feudalism, but it was not very rigid. Basically, it was the movement of classes was much more fluid in Vijayanagara Empire. And that was, there are a couple of reasons for that. Like Harihara and Bukkai, who founded the Vijayanagara Empire, they themselves came from what is called as one of the lower classes. They were called Kurubas, who were basically shepherd classes. They themselves were considered the Kuruba classes. So there was no rigid caste hierarchy there. There was no very rigid caste hierarchy there. And apart from that, you had different smaller kingdoms, which is called as the polygars, who again were made up of a different, like some were from very higher caste, some were from very lower caste. So while there was a feudalism, internally each was a feudal kingdom, it was not like one community was dominating. Like it was a much more looser confederation of communities, and there was actually there was a larger scope for upward mobility. Sorry, yeah, to some extent the Bhakti movement also. See, like I told you, one thing was around the time you had Basaveshwara, who started this Lingayat movement around the same time. So Basaveshwara was the one who actually said that there's no caste division, everybody is equal in the eyes of God. And Vijayanagar actually was very much influenced by this, what is called as the Veerashaivism. That was one of the guiding philosophies of this. Apart from that, the efforts of preachers like Purandardasa, Kanakadasa, who traveled from place to place, trying to break down the different bonds and preaching of equality between places, ensured that while it was feudal in nature, during that time it was like any other, it was pretty much feudal in nature, but it was not very rigid either. It had offered enough scope for anybody to rise up the ranks in the order. Yes, sir.
Sir, whenever there is a kingdom, it has to be feudal, sir. So there is nothing to be apologetic about it, sir.
That's not a question of apologetic. What I'm saying was, she was asking like about the feudalism thing.
Yes, feudalism was existing in every kingdom across the world, all over the world, sir.
Yeah.
One, sir. Second, sir, social mobility was there during the known time in the Indian history.
Yeah.
There is n number of examples where a lower strata, lower society, they attend the kingship.
Absolutely.
So social mobility is not attached to Bhakti per se, sir.
No, no. In this case, why I put out the bhakti was in this case it did play a significant role. Maybe if we could have a look into my book, that is where I exploited in the religion part.
And third thing, sir, the economic base of Vijayanagar Empire was very, very strong because most of the diamond found in the world over, sir, pre 1905, they were mined somewhere or other in India and mostly in South, sir. Mostly in South, sir.
Golconda, that was primarily in Golconda.
Plus, they had the gold mine, sir.
Absolutely, that was like what that's what I explained. Like diamond mines are one of the reasons of.
And pearl, sir, there are only two centers in the known history. One was the near Rameshwaram, another was near Bahrain, sir.
Right.
Plus, the international trade was not the bulk cargo, sir. It was basically of the luxuries, sir.
Pearls and spices
And very, very useful things like the so-called Damascus sword was not manufactured in Damascus.
yes.
It was manufactured in India on the western coast.
Same thing with Muslin also. Same thing with the Muslin co-op that was came from this place called Machilipatnam.
And I have one last thing to add, sir.
Yes, sir.
We have never learned and we will never learn, sir, this thing, that the defeat of the Battle of Tallikot was primarily because the cavalry, mounted cavalry, mounted archer, they defected en masse, sir. And the Vijayanagar Empire could not identify whether they are our people or now they are fighting from the other side.
This is what I explained in the presentation.
And this has happened, sir, in 48 also. The Gilgit garrison, sir, en masse it has defected and 1/3 of J&K has gone to Pakistan.
Pakistan, yeah.
And therefore yesterday also 3 of our soldiers have defected, sir, and they have joined the war in Shri. So this will happen, sir. It's a recurrent thing, sir.
Absolutely. I mean, it's something which we never learned from actually. And I don't. Yes, madam.
I have one observation I wanted confirmation from you. You started off by your talk by saying that the other Bahman empire, they were Shias. They were Shias from Persia. So throughout for the 4 centuries and even afterwards, there were mass atrocities on Hindus. People were killed. And so general perspective today is that Shias are the more peaceful branch of Islam. So I just wanted to
No, not necessary. Not necessary.
Other thing is that sir just made a connection with the Gilgit, who were defected.
The Muslims garrison defected to Pakistan
Which-
under Gilgit.
Yeah.
That was in the 1948.
I just wanted to add that those are also Shias, by the Gilgit.
See, I'll tell you what. In the end of the day, you call them Ahmadis or Shias or whatever XYZ you labels you different.
I just wanted to say that make that point that please we have to realize that no one is.
No, that's the reason why I stressed on the Shias thing. It's like you could really when it comes to the crunch, like it doesn't matter if it is Shia or matter of fact, no Ahmadi Shias who are right now the Hazara Shias who are facing, they are the ones Ahmadis and Hazara Shias who are now facing the persecution in Pakistan. They are at the fore. They are actually the most active in demanding Pakistan. They are most active during partition. Yeah, actually, like I told you, if we go back, the reason, the reason why they took the Muslim archers was like he took it from a more east. He looked at it from a more tactical perspective of view, saying that we didn't have our archers, so we get them from outside. So basically, okay, fine, maybe for tactical reasons or for military reasons you took it, but like I told, in hindsight, it was pretty much a disaster. It was going to be a disastrous move sometime or other in the future, and that's the reason why you might say tactics or you might say some tactical strategy and all, but certain decisions are always going to be disastrous in the long term, and this is what happened to Vijayanagar. Muslim archers were bought in, ostensibly trained in the. Actually, I just omitted some part of my presentation. They are not just bought in. Let me come to that. The Muslim archers were not just brought into the Vijayanagar army. Mosque was built for them. They were given the rights to pray. They had their own mosques built for them. They had facility to pray, to practice and follow their own religion. So they were given everything. But finally, when it came to the crunch,
They switched
After
sides.
9th, yeah.
I just want to go back to one of the earlier questions, which is what sense of India did Vijayanagar Empire have? What sense of India? Because when we had the lectures on Shivaji, it was very clear that the Marathas had some sense of what India is, geographically speaking. But Marathas come after Vijayanagar, and does Vijayanagar have the sort of seeds of this attitude? I wonder.
See, in a way, the Vijayanagar was an inspiration for Marathas. In a way, Vijayanagar was inspiration for Marathas. So basically, like because of them laying the foundation, in a way they laid the foundations of when this. I mean, though again one more thing, one of the rivals of Vijayanagar Empire was again the early Maratha rulers. They were attacked by the Marathas also on the Vijayanagar, early Maratha rulers. But once Hampi fell, okay, one thing which I want to put out here, after Hampi fell also, Vijayanagar Empire still continued. In fact, it continued almost till late up till 14th century, till the end of the British rule. But it was mostly in a fragmented and shrunken form. But after that, there were actually a lot of tactical alliances with the Marathas happening also. After the fall of Hampi, the reason why Talakota is taken to be the end of Hampi is because it totally destroyed Hampi, and you can just imagine the largest city in your empire goes destroyed. That's like people in. After that also there was a lot. I mean, if you actually read my book, I covered that part also, like what happened after Talikota. I covered that part also. So during that time there were some kind of tactical alliances with the Marathas also against some of the Bahmani rulers. So in a way that laid the foundation for them. Regarding India, I think I answered the same question. Rahul also put the same question. Like, for some, I mean, the reasons which were known, to date, most have not considered Vijayanagar as a kind of pan-empire. Unlike the Marathas, which they say is a kind of pan-Indian empire. But I feel that should not be the case, because in a way it is as much as an Indian empire, but it is somewhere in academy. I mean, maybe because of the bias of the academicians or historians, that's not given credit. Yeah.
I mean, can you quickly, if you know what happened to the temples? I heard in Hampi that one of the, I think it was the Krishna temple, was stuffed with logs and burnt. So do you know some gory details of how the temples were desecrated?
See, like some of the idols were there, some of the murtis were there. Okay, I want you to say murtis. The main attack was on the murtis. Even if you visit Hampi, you can find most of the murtis are pretty much damaged in parts. They were like totally broken up. Some of them were burned, and most of them were broken up. Of course, they couldn't damage that huge Narsimha idol to some extent, but of course, it was too huge to be broken up. One of the reasons, and of course, I mean, I don't have that much in-depth details on that, but like some of the temples were burned down and things. But one thing, fortunately, what happened was, because all these temples and buildings in Vijayanagar were built of granite, they've still managed to survive that kind of destruction. Because, like, granite is not that easy to burn or break down. So, in such a way, they managed to survive destruction. In fact, I'll tell you one thing: even after Talikota, even after Hampi was sacked and destroyed, the city was still there. It's not that the city was totally broken down. But fact is that attack was so traumatic and the destruction was so distinct that people didn't want to go and inhabit that city there. I mean, like what happened at 4 days? There was 4 days of such terrible looting and burning of temples, like huge, and most of all the looting. It had such a traumatic effect on people that nobody wanted to go back there. And in effect, what happened was Hampi became a ghost city. I mean, nobody wanted to go back there. Such was the trauma, I think.
Interesting story there. The Virupaksha temple survived because they saw a wild boar roaming around. So
there's one other that there's a boar roaming around, and they didn't want to attack the temple. But again, that's like, I think you are having some question, right?
Yeah, just a continuation of that. That was my question. If you think of Hampi, there are two things which come to our mind. One is the chariot. The other one is the Virupaksha temple. Now, this probably was not damaged. The chariot is more or less in the same thing, and Virupaksha is partially damaged, and the rest of the temple survives. Now, how was that these two survived? Was it the admiration of such marvelous work?
Oh, no, obviously, no. No, obviously no. See, one thing.
Then I'm just wondering, they could have destroyed this also.
No. One thing. No, one thing. The Muslim invaders' primary target was the temples. There are two reasons for that. One was the murtis, which was totally against their basic faith, that idolaters, kafirs. So that was the first target. Second target was the temples were where the riches were mostly. All the temples were where most of the riches most of the temples were filled with riches. The precious stones and the gold and temples, all of them were in the temples. And one more thing was, in those days the temples were temples were not just places where you went and prayed. They were like a part of the civilization. I mean, people went there, they studied there, they wrote sculpture, they studied there. They were they were places where you worshipped, they were places where you studied. It was like a center point of the civilization itself. And that's the reason why the invaders' target was primarily against the temples. I mean, the Radha which was there was a pretty fantastic piece of architecture, but it was something that was not, it was something that was not really, something that not really went against it. It was just like any other structure. But temples was something that really, like two factors. One was of course the murtis, which went against their basic belief. Second thing, the riches which are stored in the temple. The other factor which I told you, it was considered to be one of the main points of the civilization.
One more point to that was that Sanjeev Salia talks about it, that temples were almost like banks. So merchant guilds used to use temples as contract holders.
Right.
So the moment you attacked a temple, the entire contract structure of business fell apart. It's one of the reasons why Somnath was supposedly attacked so many times.
I mean, that's actually one of the reasons also. Yes.
During the earlier Khilji and Tughlaq invasions, there was often extensive slave taking.
Yes.
Is that seen again with the Bahmani kingdoms?
Bahmani kingdoms are not much of slavery, but they were pretty notorious for destruction. Like I told you, they had that kind of loot and trade tactics. So they used to attack, and whenever Bahmani rulers didn't go much into slavery. Of course, maybe after Talikota, they did take a lot of slaves after Hampi and all. But their tactic was, whenever they're attacking a place, on the way, whichever towns or villages used to come, if they were Hindu dominated, wipe them out. If temples were there, loot them. So their tactics were more loot and raid tactics. Raid the places, loot them, massacre the citizens. But there's not that much evidence of slavery among the Bahmanis, as far as I know.
So I have two questions.
Yeah, sure.
The first deals with the focus on development related to science and technology in Vijayanagar, because around the same time scientific development was taking place in the Arabian states and also in Europe, particularly Italy. So despite its contact with the world, why has Vijayanagar not been able to focus so much on science and technology?
Again, like I told you, this is one part that has been conveniently. It's not that Vijayanagar. It's not that because, see, if you go into my book, actually, there's a section on literature. There's a heavy lot of scientific literature during the Vijayanagar period, actually, which again, for reasons best known, has not been bought out. There were books on mathematics. There were books on astronomy. There were books on mathematics. There were books on astronomy. There was even a book on music also, where it was treated in a very scientific manner. But again, most of those works have went into obscurity. That's not known. And regarding the invention part, like I told you about the irrigation canals, the irrigation and aqueduct canals, that was a pretty impressive feat of engineering. So there was scientific development, and there were books on science which are being written at that time, which unfortunately has not come out much. So giving an impression that not much was going on in science technology.
And the other point is, sorry to interrupt, the other point is that most of the European Renaissance was actually based on translations from Indian texts.
From Indian texts. So if you read the book, actually, there's a section on literature where I
extensively mentioned about the different scientific works that were written during that time. So there was work going on science. Which my only thing is, like most aspects of history, that has not been really brought out. Yeah.
What was the foreign relations of Vijayanagar kingdom? Because you've seen emissaries from other countries coming to the Vijayanagar kingdom. But what was their reach as far as other countries? I think I saw Jaffna somewhere. But that's pretty close to there.
See, they primarily more into trading relationships. Primarily more into trade. So the trade was primarily at two ends. One was with China. One was with China and the countries in the southern Eastern Asia. The other one was with the Arab countries, Arab and Persian countries. So that was their relationship. Their relation with the outside world was mostly on trading part. So basically, they had a trade in spices and pearls. They used to send to the other countries, and like I told you, they had they imported goods from the other countries. So that was how. And during the course of trading, you had rulers from the neighboring countries coming in. One strategic tie-up they had was with the Portuguese, which I explained for reasons best known, like is a common friend of the Bahmanis. So most of the accounts of Vijayanagar actually were written by most of these primarily Portuguese and Italian travelers who came up with these accounts of Vijayanagar Empire.
So you mentioned like the campaign to Ceylon. So they had a flourishing navy, a strong navy.
Not as okay. I mean, it was not as strong as famous as the Chola navy. It was not as strong as the Chola navy, but they did have a pretty good navy. But compared to the Cholas, their naval expeditions were not that extensive. I mean, this was like one of the very rare cases they had, but again, not that extensive compared to the Cholas. But they did have a good shipbuilding industry because that. But again, like I told you, it was mostly used for trading purposes, not that much for military or war purposes.